Bring Out Your Greatness with Dr. Kathleen Friend. Hi. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Someone Gets Me. I have a really cool guest for us today. I know Kathleen through SING, the Supporting Emotional Needs of Gifted group. And when we started connecting, we started realizing there were so many parallels and so many exciting things that we both love and have been involved with in our career that it was only natural that she came on Someone Gets Me. So here is Dr. Kathleen with us. Thank you for coming.
Oh, I can't wait to see what we cook up together.
I know it's going to be so fun. And I want to start off a little bit with I want this show to be about inner greatness, but about the greatness that isn't the obvious in people, like bright and talented and gifted people. Like everybody knew I was smart when I was growing up and all of those things. But I know that one of the things that's near and dear to your heart is that all the cool stuff that I kind of see as being like under the radar, you know, like the mycelium in the forest, all the neat stuff. And so, how did you get interested in paying attention to greatness and gifts on the underneath part? How did that start for you?
That
I just
that
think
is
that's really fun.
that is the million-dollar question, and that is just pivotal, Diane, because when I started in on this, just to give a little bit of a runway in, I'm a psychiatrist, and I was trained the way psychiatrists are trained. It is what it is. But I became pretty unhappy with being in that box of seeing what was wrong. So I knew that I had to break out, and I started thinking about, well, how can I just see what's going right and look at the greatness? So I kind of went on a journey with that too. Like, how can I help parents or teachers or anybody really? How do we change so that our eyes are that we can notice this other little bit less, maybe a little subterranean stuff?
Mhm.
You know, how do we do that? And so, as I worked with that over time, what became apparent to me is, oh, we've got to get to help adults get into the voice of the heart, to see what the heart can see and not just the mind. We love our minds. I love my mind. I love your mind, Diana. We connected at a gifted conference.
Right.
I could wax forever on that. But that voice in the heart has a little different perspective, and it's widening. And so I like to help. So over time, I became where I tried to help people uh, get into that voice of the heart so they could actually see and notice new things about, let's say, well, their children or other people.
Oh,
And
that's
it's kind of right there in front of us, but we gotta get a lot of these filters out of the way.
well. I think that smart people, bright people, gifted people, whatever word you want to use, and in this culture are so over reinforced for how we think and so under reinforced for how we feel and what our soul is saying, like what our heart and our soul is saying. It's like a bunch of heads walking around on sticks. Like what happened to this connection?
Yeah, yeah.
So in your amazing life experience, because you're a musician, you're an author, you're a psychiatrist, you're a mom, you're a gifted person, like so you're a multi-potentialite in my world. That's what I call it. What is the connection between our heart and our soul?
Oh, wow. Now that's an easy question to answer. Okay. Okay, let's take a crack at it. Okay, so the soul. Well, the soul, look, I am not a philosopher, a metaphysicist. I probably can't give you the definite answer. However, I think we all have these inklings inside of us that are deep. This little voice that kind of like peeps up that we just like go, no, 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 no. Like what? Like I can't. No. Then the brain goes, blah, 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 blah. But this little voice oftentimes comes back, and it's this place. I think that's the soul talking. You know, I've come to believe I mean, we all come in different. You call it our soul. We come with a template, so to speak, and then stuff gets put on this template. Our culture, our religion, our expectations, blah blah blah. But we kind of come in with this like energetic template, if you will, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? And it is unique. We may be connected to source or God or whatever, but there is a unique fingerprint of our soul. And I think we hear that through the heart.
Yes.
So I guess that's how I would connect it. That I don't know how to get me. I don't know how to get to that deeper soul through my head. It's a feeling. There's like there can be words, but there's emotion. There's feeling. There's passion. There's like, it's that thing that says, I was made for this, even if I have no idea how to do it, even if it's not practical, even if there's like, in a million years, I'm never going to figure out how I'm supposed to do that. But getting to that, what? We're going a little off the greatness qualities, but the clue to all this is what are those desires deep in our hearts?
And I think that's important. I mean, that a lot of people have that little voice, that inkling, that heart's desire kind of keeps going through. And I always keep saying it's like an engraved invitation. It'll keep coming back until you finally listen. So you can decide how much you want to be distracted, but the voice never shuts up and it will get louder until you finally say yes, right? And so I'm a big one on saying yes to our heart's desire that way, our vision, like what we're here to do. And I think
I
it's
have a story about that too.
okay, cool. It's important for all of us to bring our hearts and our heads into unison, into a collective, like an orchestra, where they can support and play and do great things together, but it's not one or the other. It's not our soul is different than our heart, that's different than our head. They're all beautiful instruments in the same orchestra.
I like to say that the heart sets the agenda or the direction, and then the mind carries it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do have a story about how that played out in my own life.
Uh-huh. I want to hear. Tell us.
Well, from a young age, I always loved music, and I had some pretty profound experiences as a child with music. Now, looking back, I would say they were probably mystical experiences that came to me through music. And I thought to myself as a young child, you know, if people could feel what I feel when I listen to music, no problem. We'd all get along, there'd be harmony. This was the Cold War, it's like, no Cold War. And so I never forgot that. It was it imprinted me in a way. So I went on, and then it came time, got through high school, time for college. And I knew that, like, I really wanted to be a musician, but I didn't have any particular skills. I had a little bit. I could read music, I could play piano a little bit, I sang in the chorus, but I was no great shakes. And let's be honest, I wasn't like particularly gifted in music, but I had a great love and desire. I was, by normal standards, other things were easier for me than music. But
Okay.
my heart but my heart was so there. And I can remember my parents saying, well, you can't go into music. I'm back in the day, my mother, God bless her, she wanted us girls to be able to be independent and support ourselves, and not have to be dependent on others if we didn't want to be. So she said, well, you can't make a living as a musician. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. So I went to college, did, something else. And then eventually I made my way to medical school, became a doctor, did three specialties because I was so in the wrong place. Okay. Internal
Oh,
medicine, then I did nuclear medicine, and then I went to psychiatry, hoping, well, maybe there, finally I can express some creativity. Well, but deep in my soul, that music thing. So one day after I had finished my residency and fellowship in psychiatry, and I was working at my first job, and I can remember this day, I was sitting across from a patient and I was listening, but suddenly this other voice kind of came through out of nowhere and said, if you don't do music, you will die. It's like, oh. Now I understood that I wasn't in danger physically.
Right.
I didn't think that it was a message from my soul. I went, wow. So at that point, I was in Madison, Wisconsin. I marched over to the music school and I auditioned for a choir. Anyway, the rest is history. I lived there for 7, 8 years. I worked my way up in the choirs. There's some beginner ones, and you work and I kind of worked my way up through that over 7 years and went from alto 2 to soprano 1. I got my voice trained, and got to my natural place. And then I tried to go to music school, and they said, I got rejected. Like, it's like this was University of Wisconsin, Madison. They said, like, no way. Like, and one person even said, well, you're too old. And I was in my 40s at the time. Like, and I was like crushed. I didn't have super expectations, but it would have been nice. Anyway, fast forward, we moved to a new place. I get a job. And I lose, as a doctor, I lose my job after 8 months. I lose it. I'm sort of fired. And I was in a kind of remote part of Massachusetts, so it wasn't an obvious next step. And I had just moved my whole family. I had a child who was only 11 years old. We weren't going to pick up and move again, just bought a house. Anyway, long story short, 6 months later, I go audition to a local music school in Massachusetts, and I got in. And so it was a blessing that, thank goodness, I got fired from that job because I would have never had the courage to do it on my own. And then I just kind of followed the breadcrumbs, and there were a few synchronicities that happened. I got into that, and I worked really hard for 4 years, and I got my degree in music.
I love it. I love it.
And I satisfied. So here's the thing. I knew deep down, I'm not going to be a professional musician. I am who I am, but I love it. And my soul is not going to be satisfied until this is completed. So I completed it. Now I sing whatever in groups, whatever. And you know what? I'm perfectly okay. It's not highfalutin, but I satisfied that wish of my soul. And I went back to medicine. And then after having satisfied that, I was able to go back into medicine and use the creativity that I found in expressing myself in music. I put that into my medical practice. And then the rest of that's a whole story too. And now what I do now is completely out of the box psychiatry. But I merged that creative side that came from my heart, I guess, or soul,
Right.
into what looked like a traditional pathway, and I put them together.
That's beautiful. And so I think that that's how come you got that voice that said, if you don't do music, you're going to die, because your soul is here to bring together something that's traditional, that doesn't seem to be very creative, psychiatry, and something that's like the other extreme of music, because people think that, music's way out there, even though I think it's a high form of intelligence. And then we bring it together. And so musicians, and this is what I would really love your view on. Musicians' role in our society typically is to help make sense of things. It helps us make sense of our world. It helps us make sense of what's happening. And there's a social contract with that, or at least there was when I was growing up a lot, where the musicians were explaining culture to all of us in that kind of creative way. And I work with a lot of musicians, almost all musicians, and creative artists and things. And I watch how they are like the leaders in the culture. Their creativity is kind of like the beginning of the wave, so to speak. And so, how do you see your role in all of that? Because I see that you're taking psychiatry to a whole different place. And to me, that's the beginning of shifting that social contract, that you can be a psychiatrist and you can be a creative genius and you can positively affect people, and they're not mutually exclusive.
Hmm. Yeah. Gosh, how can I say? What can I say? That's kind of just the path I walked, putting them together. But that was a revelation. I mean, it didn't happen overnight, and it involved a certain level of trust.
Mhm.
And I think that there was a willingness at some point to jump off the cliff and trust
Yeah, willingness. Yeah.
without knowing where I was going to land and being okay with that. And
Mhm.
I do think in the arts there is an element of that. Like you open, I'm just trying to think of my own process because now I've written books. I open and I go, like, what wants to come through?
Mhm.
And I do think that artists and musicians, this is hard to answer. I hear my world inside is music, like in my head. Like, you know, I can just start singing a melody. Don't ask me to do it now. I've got a virus. I mean, but like I just have music in me or something. And like uh I just open my mouth and I just trust like the process. Uh and I think that you have to be, how we talked at the beginning, like how do you see that undercurrent? Did you
Mhm.
say mycelium or was that before we talked? But
Yeah, mycelium. Yeah.
yeah,
Like,
this
you know,
kind of like this web that's just underneath our conscious awareness and what's like happening in the world. And you sort of, I think musicians or others, I think we kind of just dip into that a bit. We dip there and we sort of feel. I mean, I don't have words for this, but like I think we feel on some level what's coming. There's a visionary aspect to it and
absolutely.
and a courage to speak. Sometimes it's speaking the unspeakable. Now, I don't think that's true in my particular music, but like I'm thinking back to the 60s when all the, music came out and it defined my generation defined us and the protest movement and all that and like and how they just stayed right on the in the current of what needed to be said. Um,
Okay, so
so, that
thinking
make any
about
sense?
you're making perfect sense. And so your books and your work is all about greatness and seeing the greatness that's not necessarily obvious in addition to what's obvious. And for me, that's that dipping into that undercurrent is, as you call it, that to me, it's like kind of like just connecting to the ethers, the substance that we can't see, but we are the ones bringing it into reality. So the book writes itself through you, the songs
I get
through you,
downloads.
right?
And that comes through my heart meditation that I do when I'm sitting in meditation. When I get into this place, the muse will speak, but you have to get out of the way. You just have to get out of the way, and I can't say when it's going to come. And
Mhm.
then sometimes it's just like, oh yeah, that. And then you wait, and if it's an important idea, it comes back over and over. Like you can't go on every single one because there's too many, but the good ones come back over and over and
Right.
let
They
you
just
know.
keep following you around till you say yes, so you might as well say yes.
I Yeah, I think musicians are actually very fascinating because in my experience with many musicians, and my world has been more classical music, so I have a little more experience, but I don't want to offend anybody, but like musicians are a lot smarter than doctors. I mean, they like for me, like I felt like to me they're like the smartest people on the planet because it's not, I don't necessarily include me, but like when I think of somebody playing the organ and they've got two hands and they're doing the pedals and like that's like quite an accomplishment. And like I'm thinking about Bach, who's one of my favorite of all time. I mean, any music person who loves composition and theory loves Bach because like he was so foundational. But to watch that play out like on those multiple levels at the same time, like that's really something. I really admire that. Um, yeah.
Yeah. My mom was a classical pianist, and I went
Okay.
to bed every night growing up to Chopin, Bach, Beethoven, Stravinsky, the whole bit. And I love them all. And I understand the music theory because she taught it to me as I was growing up. She wouldn't
Yeah.
teach me how to play the piano, but she would teach me the theory. It was
Yeah,
quite
piano
interesting.
and theory just go together like
And
hat and glove.
and so I have a great appreciation and an understanding. And I believe that, again, intuition, that visionary part of us, as Forbes magazine even said, intuition's the highest form of intelligence. So it is an intelligence that's working in and through all of us when, as you said, we get out of the way and let our greatness show up. That the greatest disservice we do, I believe, is jamming up the system, staying in the way.
I like the way you put that, jamming up the system. And I'm thinking back, just to circle back to our kids, because I mostly, I deal with kids and families and parents and teachers, but in that world, and we really jam. These kids get really jammed up
Yeah.
uh, with
So,
all these expectations and
right.
what's on the surface.
And so when kids get jammed up, or adolescents or adults, and their giftedness is kind of like, I imagine it kind of like behind it's kind of like what I imagine is like the old school trash compactors, and everything's compressing in, and then when you finally release it, it just comes out, and it's sometimes not pretty. So what are the consequences when
Oh,
somebody denies, runs from, consciously or unconsciously, their own inherent vision, their own gifts, their own greatness is trying to show up? So the greatness is trying to show up, and then for whatever reason, it gets shoved back down. What are the consequences that you see from that situation?
I would say, well, there's multiple, but one of the big ones is depression.
Mm-hmm.
It's where, one way of thinking of depression is forget about the chemicals and stuff, but just if you think about depression as life force, it's like this withdrawal of life force.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. It's like it, it's just a withdrawal of life force.
Yep.
And that's the worst consequence. And then people don't want to be here, and suicidal thoughts like, I don't have anything. When people, I do really believe that people want to contribute and have meaningful lives.
Yes.
I think it's born into us.
Yep. I agree.
And when that piece gets disconnected, you can't figure out, well, like, what's the point?
Right.
So it brings us back to meaning and purpose. And meaning and purpose, I think, come out of also identifying, who am I? And like, what are my super strengths, or what am I made of? Not what somebody else. Kids learn because we tell them what they are. I mean, they internalize that, right? They
Mhm.
internalize what the parents say, the teachers, and it
Right.
becomes part of their identity, right? So we can help the children by seeing beneath the radar a little bit into their soul qualities and mirroring that back to them, so they start to have language for it, and they can see it in their like behaviors and what they actually show up doing, and we say, oh, that really shows what your adult, how how you can take so many perspectives, or how you have such a kindness and consideration, or whatever the quality is, and connect them to these inherent things in them that you're not making up. You can't make any of this. You don't want to put stuff in like, oh, you think it's a good idea. Oh yeah,
Right.
yeah,
It has
kindness.
to be real.
I
Has
mean,
to be.
we do want to teach our children some basic ethics and morals and stuff, right? But I mean, what I'm talking about goes beyond that. It really goes beyond like what we think the kids should exhibit. It's like, what is showing up?
Mhm.
And when kids have that inner wealth and are connected to what they're really made of, it gets easier to think about how they can contribute and be a part of this thing we call life. And when you're connected to that, nobody has to tell you to get up, like the reason to get out of bed in the morning. So
Mhm.
that's the worst I see. People just withdraw into depression,
Yeah, I see that
give
too.
up.
Do you think that um a lot of the kind of, this is a big sweeping question, but I was, when you said depression, I started thinking about people who complain about having a lot of anxiety. And
Mm.
sometimes I think what they're calling anxiety is more of like an existential angst or existential fear, because they're disconnected from their heart's desire and their soul. That it is anxiety, but it's a different type. It feels like it has a different quality to it. Do you see any of that?
Hmm. Well, in a very basic way, we talk about anxiety as being something like when our consciousness is moving to the future,
Mhm.
on the timeline, and depression's kind of looking back. But the anxiety, I think, um, oh, I'm sorry, I lost it. You said something but the existential, I mean, certainly this existential anxiety goes back to meaning and purpose.
Right.
Um, but sort of the garden variety anxiety is this feeling that, um, I mean, there is a lost feeling in there, isn't there?
Mhm.
Like
It
if you
seems
know,
like
I think when we kind of know what we're here to do and we have a clarity of our own vision or whatever, we can still have anxious moments. I mean, that's to be expected. We all have like, geez,
yeah.
like I have to give a presentation. I mean, there's healthy anxiety, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But the crippling kind, it just people just spin. They just spin and they become so disempowered and lose their sense that they can have some control. And that's one of the reasons I love heart rhythm meditation that I teach, because that type of meditation really strengthens that part of the nervous system, to counteract anxiety. We call it vagal tone, the vagus nerve and
I do
vagal
a lot of
tone.
work with vagus nerve. Thanks with my
Yeah, so it's a method that really works strongly with establishing that strong, um, vagal tone, which allows us to, um, get into a different part of our nervous system for even for social connection.
right. That's wonderful. So you're going to be on my meditation podcast with that meditation.
Yeah.
That'll be really fun. But coming back to this podcast, what I'd like to know from you is if people are listening to us that are also adults and who may not have kids, or they can identify with what you're saying and what we're talking about, and they're going, I really need to start like finding my vision, figuring, listening to that voice, that inkling. I need to do something, but I don't really know where to start. Now, my quick answer is, well, call me or call you and we'll help you with that. But can you give a couple tips of just like a basic, where does somebody start if they're starting to wake up, they're starting to listen to their soul, and they're looking around and they're not really sure what to do? What are a couple
Okay.
like really simple, quick things they could do?
Yes. The first step is not to reach out to me and you. It's to
Right?
go in a quiet place, in where it's quiet. Sit in a chair. You don't have to do any fancy pose. Just sit there quietly. Just put your hand on your heart. Tell yourself, whatever comes, I'm just going to let it come. I am not going to judge it. Just tell yourself, this is like special time where I get to feel, experience whatever without the inner critic, and I can even forget about it afterwards in 5 minutes. No pressure, just open. It's kind of like the old brainstorming technique, where you're like, write
Right.
down every possible idea and don't reject anything. Well, this is a little like that. And the simple is put your hand in your heart, close your eyes if that's comfortable. Some people get more anxious when they close their eyes, but for many of us, closing eyes helps us just focus inward. And don't try. Don't try to think of your vision. Don't think about it. Just take a few little breaths in and out of your heart. And just bring your awareness to the middle of your chest with your heart and breath. And you can, if you want to ask a question, you could say, "Hi, heart. This is simple. Is there anything you want to say to me today?" And listen. And maybe it won't say a thing. Maybe it will. Maybe you just ask the question, give yourself a couple minutes, go about your day, and then suddenly, 5 hours later, you're making a cup of coffee and you go, oh, whew, yeah, then it comes through. So don't discount that. It doesn't necessarily happen right in the moment.
Right? It hardly ever does. In fact, it's funny because when I used to drive to my office all the time, there was a certain block driving down the road that every time I would have these insights and awarenesses and downloads. Like I could almost know that when I went into this certain traffic light, it was like I went through a little spot. And I'm like, wow, that's like really cool. I love it.
So you have to give yourself, I guess the simple answer, give yourself permission.
It's the word, right?
Permission to sit off by yourself and to not know what's going to happen. Be okay with that. Let things show up and just start with this intention. This just an intention to let my heart speak. That's it, an intention. Then the rest, whatever happens, happens. But that's the very first. To
That's
me,
the
I think
quick
that's
way,
the first
right?
step.
And so for all of you who are going, but, and trying not to hear anything that Kathleen is saying, because you don't want to sit quietly and you're afraid to sit quietly and you're not really sure what's going to happen and you have every kind of excuse on the planet going through your head, because I can hear you,
Okay.
for all of you, do it anyway. Just do it.
Reframe it. See if you can
And
reframe it.
what you're going to do is you're going to understand that when you make friends with yourself and you give yourself permission, cool things happen, and just be open to the coolness. Anyway, I just want you to know that I hear you, all of you who are doing that but in your head.
Mm.
And
Just give yourself a little
maybe
space.
if
Just give yourself a little space.
you do a little bit, you'll see how great it really is. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. So, was there anything that I didn't bring up today that you wanted to talk about? Because I know we're getting near our time that we decided we were going to do. We could talk forever, of course.
Well,
Um,
I guess the only thing is that I'm just a really big advocate of people following their dreams. And really, I think we so get caught up in the how are we going to do it? Even if we're lucky enough to hear our voice, we get really caught up. Well, that's not practical, but blah blah blah. And I really encourage you, if you're lucky enough to hear and give yourself permission to hear, just focus on the what. The how takes care of itself over time, sometimes quickly, sometimes it takes years. This universe has a way of working with us that may not be on our timeline, but hold it. Hold it like it's a precious gift. This is part of the reframe. Hold it like a precious gift that you've been given, because it is.
right. It's totally a gift.
And you don't have to tell, and oh, here's another little tip. You don't have to tell anybody else what it is, because sometimes if you start talking about it, they'll tell you all the practical, like, you can't do that. You protect it. Protect it. It's like a jewel that you're discovering.
I am so glad you. I'm so glad you brought that up, to protect it, and not, you don't have to tell everybody everything. I had to learn that the hard way. When for the
You
first time
can
people
wait.
told me not to tell people, I'm like, what? And then I realized the value in holding it sacred.
Yeah. Eventually, there may be a time, and there probably will be a time for it to go up, but you don't have to rush it. Not required. It's enough to hold it for yourself. The hows will take care of itself over time. Just focus on the what and like, oh,
That's
cool. Okay.
I love it. Okay, so the final question for you today is my favorite question to ask, and that is this: if we're going to put a billboard up that the whole world was going to see with your quote on it, what would the quote be on this billboard?
Try to see the divinity in each person you meet.
I love that. I love that. Try to see the
It's
divinity
in
in
the
each
heart.
person you meet,
It's in
including
the
you.
heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if we could just, I don't know, I don't have a succinct, but it really does have to do with this seeing these divine qualities that each of us has and honoring that, and the ones in ourselves, and that we're actually and we're connected by our hearts.
Oh, that's beautiful too.
There we go.
Yeah, we're connected by our hearts. See the divinity in everybody. We're connected by our hearts.
Okay.
I love it. I love it. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much for being on the show with me today and sharing all your great excitement. I have goosebumps running all over me from how much fun this has been spending time with you. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So remember, everybody, put your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you because you're a rock star. You are here on purpose with a mighty purpose. So until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, be well.